What happens when a late-night talk show host thinks they can ambush a federal law enforcement director on live television? Well, you're about to find out just how badly that can backfire. Before we dive into this absolutely explosive confrontation that had security rushing the stage, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because this story is going to leave you speechless. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday evening as Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his tie for what he thought would be another easy interview. His producers had booked Todd Lyons, the newly appointed Director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, for what they internally called a gotcha segment. The plan was simple: ambush Lyons with loaded questions about recent enforcement operations, catch him off guard, and create a viral moment that would dominate social media for weeks. Kimmel had built his career on these kinds of moments, the perfectly timed zingers that would reduce his guests to stammering, uncomfortable messes, while his audience erupted in laughter and applause. He'd done it to politicians, celebrities, and public figures countless times before. Tonight, he was confident that this stern-looking federal director would be just another victim in his long list of on-air takedowns. But Todd Lyons wasn't your typical government bureaucrat. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall with the build of someone who'd spent years in the field before climbing the administrative ladder, Lyons had a reputation for being unflappable under pressure. His colleagues often joked that the man could negotiate with a hurricane and somehow convince it to change course. What Kimmel and his team didn't know was that Lyons had been briefed extensively about the show's tactics and had come prepared for war. As Lyons walked onto the stage, the audience gave him a lukewarm reception, nothing like the enthusiastic cheers they usually reserved for A-list celebrities and musicians. Kimmel stood up from behind his desk, flashing that practiced smile that had made him millions of dollars, and extended his hand for what appeared to be a friendly greeting. "Director Lyons, welcome to the show," Kimmel said, his voice carrying that fake warmth that television hosts perfect over decades of practice. "Thanks for taking the time to join us tonight." Lyons shook his hand firmly, his grip lasting just a moment longer than necessary. A subtle power play that didn't go unnoticed by the seasoned host. "Happy to be here, Jimmy, though I suspect you might not be so happy with me by the end of this conversation." The comment caught Kimmel slightly off guard, but he quickly recovered, chuckling as they both took their seats. "Oh, come on now, we're all friends here. This is just a friendly chat between two guys who want what's best for America, right?" Lyons leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed, despite being in what was essentially enemy territory. "Is that what we're calling it? Because my team did some research on your show, Jimmy, and I've got to say, your idea of a friendly chat seems to involve a lot of ambush questions and gotcha moments. But hey, I'm game if you are." The studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't how these interviews usually started. Typically, guests would play along with the banter, laugh at Kimmel's jokes, and walk right into whatever trap had been set for them. But Lyons was already turning the tables, and they were barely 2 minutes into the segment. Kimmel's smile flickered for just a moment before returning to full wattage. "Well, I think our viewers deserve honest answers about what's happening at the border and with immigration enforcement. You know, transparency and all that." "Transparency," Lyons repeated, nodding slowly. "That's interesting coming from someone who works for a network that's been caught editing interviews to change the context of what people actually said. But sure, let's talk about transparency. What exactly would you like to know?" The host's prepared question suddenly felt inadequate. He'd expected to be controlling this conversation, steering it toward the controversy he wanted to create. Instead, he found himself on the defensive, trying to regain control of his own show. "Let's start with the recent operations in major cities," Kimmel said, consulting his note cards. "Critics are saying that your agency is targeting families, separating children from their parents, and creating a climate of fear in immigrant communities. How do you respond to those allegations?" Lyons didn't even blink. "I respond by saying that those critics are either uninformed or deliberately misrepresenting the facts. Every operation we conduct follows strict protocols designed to prioritize public safety while respecting the rights of everyone involved. We don't target families, Jimmy. We target individuals who have violated federal immigration law, and we do it with the same professionalism that every other law enforcement agency in this country is expected to maintain. But surely you can understand why people are concerned, Kimmel pressed, his voice taking on that condescending tone he used when he thought he was making a particularly clever point. When you see images of children crying, families being separated, communities living in fear, doesn't that bother you at all? The question was designed to put Lyons on the defensive, to make him look callous and heartless in front of millions of viewers. But instead of stammering or offering a weak justification, Lyons leaned forward, his expression hardening. You know what bothers me, Jimmy? The fact that you're sitting here in your comfortable studio making millions of dollars a year to tell jokes and mock people while acting like you have some moral authority to lecture me about law enforcement. Do you know what I did before I took this job? I spent 15 years as a field agent, working cases that involved human trafficking, drug smuggling, and organized crime. I've seen things that would give you nightmares for months. The studio had gone completely silent. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath as Lyons continued, his voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of controlled anger. So when you ask me if it bothers me to enforce the law, here's my answer. What bothers me is that while you're sitting here playing politics with people's lives, there are children being trafficked across our borders by criminal organizations. What bothers me is that there are drugs flowing into communities that are destroying families. What bothers me is that there are dangerous criminals who are exploiting weaknesses in our system to avoid accountability for serious crimes. Kimmel tried to interject, but Lyons wasn't finished. And what really bothers me is that instead of having an honest conversation about these issues, you invited me here tonight to be part of some cheap political theater designed to make me look bad and make you look good to your audience. So let me ask you something, Jimmy. When was the last time you actually visited the border? When was the last time you talked to a parent whose child was killed by someone who shouldn't have been in this country? When was the last time you did anything other than sit behind that desk and throw stones at people who are actually trying to solve problems? The host's face had gone pale. This was not at all how this interview was supposed to go. Kimmel's face had gone pale, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. He could feel the weight of his audience's expectations, the pressure to deliver the viral moment his producers had promised. But instead of the easy target he'd expected, he was facing someone who was not only prepared, but seemed to be enjoying the confrontation. Look, Director Lyons, Kimmel said, trying to regain his composure, I think you're being a little defensive here. I'm just asking questions that the American people want answered. That's what journalists do. Lyons actually laughed at that, a sharp sound that cut through the studio's tense atmosphere like a blade. Journalist? Jimmy, you're a comedian who tells jokes about celebrities and does silly skits with people in costumes. Don't insult actual journalists by pretending you're one of them, the audience gasped audibly. No one had ever spoken to their beloved host like this before. Kimmel's face flushed red, and his hands gripped the edge of his desk so tightly his knuckles turned white. I may be a comedian, Kimmel shot back, his voice rising, but at least I don't make a living terrorizing innocent families and ripping children away from their parents. At least I don't sleep at night knowing that my job is to destroy people's lives. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Lyons accepted it without hesitation. Terrorizing innocent families? Lyons repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Jimmy, let me tell you about Terror. Terror is a 12-year-old girl who gets smuggled across the border by coyotes who assault her repeatedly during the journey. Terror is parents in Honduras who have to send their children north with strangers because criminal organizations have threatened to kill them if they don't pay protection money they don't have. Terror is American families who lose loved ones to fentanyl that flows across our border every single day. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. But you know what's really terrorizing? It's privileged celebrities like you who live in gated communities with private security, who send their kids to exclusive private schools, who have never had to worry about any of these problems, sitting in judgment of people who are actually trying to protect this country. You want to talk about destroying lives? You've made a career out of destroying people's reputations for entertainment. At least when I do my job, it's to protect Americans, not to get laughs from them. Kimmel was trembling with rage now. This was supposed to be his show, his domain, his moment to shine. But this federal director was systematically dismantling him in front of his own audience. And worse, some of them were actually nodding along with what Lyons was saying. You know what? Kimmel snapped, abandoning any pretense of professional courtesy. I don't have to sit here and listen to some government thug lecture me about morality. You work for an administration that's built on hatred and division. You're nothing but a glorified bully with a badge, and everyone knows it. The insult was designed to provoke Lyons into an angry outburst that would make him look unhinged on national television. But instead of taking the bait, Lyons smiled, a cold expression that didn't reach his eyes. A government thug? He said, his voice eerily calm. That's interesting. Tell me, Jimmy, how much money did your network make last year? How much did you personally make? Because I'm curious about someone who makes tens of millions of dollars calling a public servant who makes a fraction of that a thug. Kimmel tried to deflect. That's not relevant to what we're discussing. Oh, but it is, Lyons continued, leaning forward in his chair. See, I looked into your background before coming here tonight. You grew up in a working-class family in Brooklyn, right? Your dad was a maintenance worker, your mom was a homemaker. They worked hard to give you opportunities, to help you build a better life. And you did that. You became successful. You made something of yourself. That's the American dream, right there. The audience was confused now. Where was this going? But somewhere along the way, Lyons continued, you forgot where you came from. You forgot that there are still families out there just like yours was, working hard, trying to build better lives, trying to keep their children safe. The difference is some of those families are American citizens whose communities are being destroyed by illegal drugs and criminal organizations. Some of those families are legal immigrants who followed the rules and are watching others cut in line. And some of those families are living in countries where they're genuinely afraid for their lives. He paused, studying Kimmel's face. My job is to help sort all of that out, to enforce the laws that Congress passed, to protect all of those families. Your job, apparently, is to mock anyone who tries to do something about these problems while you count your money in your mansion in Hollywood. So tell me, Jimmy, who's really the thug here? The question hit Kimmel like a physical blow. He could see some audience members shifting uncomfortably in their seats, could feel the energy in the room changing. This was supposed to be his moment of triumph, his chance to embarrass a government official and score political points with his base. Instead, he was being systematically exposed as a hypocrite by someone who clearly understood both politics and media better than he'd anticipated. You don't know anything about me, Kimmel said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. You don't know what I care about or what I've done to help people. You're right, Lyons admitted. I don't know you personally, but I know your record. I know that you use your platform to attack people you disagree with while hiding behind the excuse that you're just a comedian. I know that you make millions of dollars by dividing Americans against each other, by encouraging people to hate their neighbors based on their political beliefs. And I know that when someone challenges you on any of it, you fall back on calling them names and questioning their motives. The host was losing control of the situation completely. His carefully crafted persona was crumbling in real time, and millions of viewers were watching it happen. Desperate to regain the upper hand, he decided to play his trump card. Well, at least I'm not a fascist, Kimmel declared, his voice dripping with contempt. At least I don't work for people who want to turn America into some kind of police state, where anyone who doesn't look like them gets rounded up and shipped away. The accusation was so over the top, so obviously designed to provoke an emotional reaction, that for a moment the studio fell completely silent. Even Kimmel seemed to realize he'd gone too far, but it was too late to take it back. Lyons stood up slowly, his 6'2" frame towering over the seated host. When he spoke, his voice was deadly quiet, but it carried clearly throughout the studio. "A fascist," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Jimmy, my grandfather fought fascists in World War II. He landed on Omaha Beach and fought his way across Europe to help liberate concentration camps. My father fought communists in Vietnam. I've spent my entire adult life fighting criminals and terrorists who want to harm Americans. And you have the audacity to sit there and call me a fascist because I enforce immigration law?" The tension in the studio was now palpable. Security guards near the stage had tensed up, sensing that something was about to happen. The audience sat in stunned silence, unsure whether they should be applauding or calling for help. "You know, what a real fascist would do, Jimmy," Lyons continued, his voice rising for the first time. "A real fascist would shut down shows like this one. A real fascist would arrest comedians who mock the government. A real fascist would control what people can say and think and believe. But here you are, on national television, calling a federal law enforcement officer a fascist, and instead of being arrested or censored, you're going to go home tonight to your mansion and count the money you made from this show." He took a step closer to Kimmel's desk. "So maybe, just maybe, you should think about what that means before you throw around words like fascist to describe people who've spent their lives defending the freedoms that allow you to be as ignorant and offensive as you want to be." Kimmel was on his feet now, too, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. The carefully constructed facade of the affable late-night host had completely crumbled, revealing something much uglier underneath. His hands were shaking as he pointed an accusatory finger at Lyons. "Don't you dare lecture me about freedom," Kimmel spat, his voice cracking with emotion. "Don't you dare stand there and pretend you're some kind of hero when you're nothing but a government enforcer doing the dirty work for politicians who want to scapegoat immigrants for every problem in America." The audience was completely silent, now watching this meltdown unfold with a mixture of fascination and horror. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a public breakdown happening in real time on national television. Lyons remained perfectly calm, which only seemed to infuriate Kimmel further. "You're right about one thing, Jimmy. I am a government enforcer. I enforce the laws that Congress passed, the laws that presidents from both parties have signed, the laws that courts have upheld. You know what that's called? It's called the rule of law, and it's one of the fundamental principles that separates democratic societies from chaos." "Spare me the civics lesson," Kimmel shot back. "We both know what this is really about. This is about fear. This is about hatred. This is about convincing Americans that their problems are all caused by people who don't look like them or talk like them." Lyons shook his head slowly. "No, Jimmy, that's what your show is about. That's what you do every single night. You get up there and you tell your audience that half the country is evil, that anyone who disagrees with you is stupid or racist or fascist. You make millions of dollars by teaching Americans to hate each other, and then you have the nerve to lecture me about division?" The accusation hit home, and Kimmel's response was immediate and vicious. "At least I'm not hiding behind a badge. While I destroy people's lives," he screamed, all pretense of professional demeanor gone. "At least I'm not pretending that what I do is noble when I'm really just a bully with government authority." That was the moment when Lyons's composure finally cracked. Not because of the insult, but because of what it revealed about the person hurling it. "You want to know what's really destroying people's lives, Jimmy?" Lyons said, his voice rising to match Kimmel's volume. "It's not law enforcement. It's not immigration policy. It's people like you who have platforms that reach millions of Americans and use them to spread poison instead of trying to solve problems. He gestured toward the audience, many of whom were now visibly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Look at these people, Jimmy. Look at your audience. These are good Americans who work hard, who pay their taxes, who love their families and their country. They don't come here to watch you have a nervous breakdown because someone challenged your political opinions. They come here to laugh, to forget about their problems for an hour, to feel good about themselves and their lives. Lyons turned to address the audience directly, ignoring Kimmel completely. But instead of giving you entertainment, instead of giving you something positive and uplifting, your host decided to invite me here tonight to ambush me with political attacks. He thought it would be funny to try to humiliate someone whose job is to protect Americans. He thought you would enjoy watching him tear down someone who dedicates his life to public service. Several audience members were nodding now, and Kimmel could see that he was losing them. The realization sent him into an even deeper spiral of rage and panic. "Don't listen to him," Kimmel pleaded with his own audience, his voice desperate. "He's trying to manipulate you. He's trying to make you forget that he works for an administration that wants to tear families apart, that wants to build walls instead of bridges, that wants to make America a place where only certain people are welcome." But Lyons wasn't finished. He turned back to face Kimmel, and when he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades dealing with criminals and liars. "Jimmy, I've been doing this for a long time. I've interrogated drug dealers, human traffickers, terrorists, and murderers. And you know what they all have in common? When they're caught, when they're cornered, when they realize that their lies aren't working anymore, they all do exactly what you're doing right now. They get angry, they start shouting, they try to turn themselves into victims, and they lash out at anyone who threatens to expose the truth about who they really are." The comparison was devastating, and Kimmel knew it. He could see the cameras capturing every moment of his humiliation, could imagine the clips that would be played endlessly on social media and news programs. His reputation, his career, everything he had built was crumbling in front of millions of viewers. In his desperation, he made one final, catastrophic mistake. "Get out!" Kimmel screamed, pointing toward the exit. "Get out of my studio! Security, get this man out of here right now. I don't have to listen to this garbage on my own show." The demand was so unexpected, so obviously inappropriate, that even his own production team seemed stunned. Security guards looked back and forth between Kimmel and their supervisors, unsure of what they were supposed to do. Lyons hadn't threatened anyone, hadn't become violent, hadn't done anything that would justify being physically removed from the set. Lyons looked around at the chaos Kimmel had created, the confused security guards, the shocked audience, the production crew scrambling to figure out how to handle the situation. Then he smiled, not the cold smile from earlier, but something that looked almost like pity. "You know what, Jimmy? I think I'll save you the embarrassment of having your security team escort me out for the crime of disagreeing with you on your own show. I'll leave on my own." He straightened his tie and began walking toward the exit, but stopped and turned back one final time. "But before I go, let me leave you and your audience with one thought. This right here, what just happened, this is exactly what's wrong with political discourse in America today. Instead of having honest conversations about difficult issues, instead of treating people with different opinions as fellow Americans who might have something valuable to contribute, we attack each other, we call each other names, and we try to silence anyone who challenges our preconceptions." He looked directly into the main camera. "America deserves better than this. Americans deserve leaders who can have difficult conversations without melting down, who can defend their positions without resorting to name-calling, who can disagree with someone without questioning their fundamental humanity. We deserve leaders who are more interested in solving problems than in scoring political points." As he walked off the stage, The studio remained completely silent, except for the sound of his footsteps echoing across the floor. Kimmel stood behind his desk, his face pale and his hands still shaking, unsure of what to do next. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of his complete and total defeat. The audience sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. Many of them had come expecting to see their favorite comedian destroy another political figure with clever jokes and sharp wit. Instead, they had watched that same comedian expose himself as petty, vindictive, and completely unprepared for a real confrontation with someone who refused to play by his rules. As the studio doors closed behind Lyons, the silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Kimmel attempted to regain some semblance of control over his own show. "Well," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I guess that's what happens when you try to have an honest conversation with these people." But even his most loyal audience members weren't buying it anymore. The damage was done. The mask had been removed, and everyone had seen exactly who Jimmy Kimmel really was when the cameras were rolling, and he couldn't hide behind his carefully crafted persona. The interview that was supposed to be his triumph had become his downfall, and the federal director who was supposed to be his victim had walked away completely unscathed, leaving behind a host whose credibility lay in ruins, and whose show would never quite recover from this moment of devastating honesty. So what do you think? Did Kimmel deserve what happened to him? Or did Lyons go too far? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more stories that show what happens when the cameras keep rolling and the masks come off.